Okay, so let's see if this works. So welcome to all of Dr. Lundy's students who are joining us today. For Dr. Lundy students only, if you could put your name and your campus in the chat, I will send this along to her for attendance purposes. Don't worry, if you're my students, don't worry about it. I take attendance separately. But if you are Dr. Lundy's, put your name and campus in the chat. So welcome. Week 5. Where's the time gone? Unbelievable. So let's just start out with questions. Anybody have any burning questions they need to ask? Nobody has one question about anything. Really? Still doing attendance, so trying to multitask here. Okay. Okay, everybody, so that means that everybody's working on their vulnerable populations assignment, right? Hopefully.
Yes, ma'am.
All righty, great. And I still need to hear from several groups in this class about what infectious disease you're picking to do your second group project. I've only heard from Wednesdays. I've heard from 2 groups. I still need.
Marvel,
Yes.
this is Cynthia. I know sent you and you replied back.
I got
Great.
yours. Yep.
So we're okay to start on that one?
Yep. I've heard
Great.
from
Okay.
Cynthia's group, Cynthia, Lori, Madison, Ashley. I've heard from your group, and I've heard from Jane, Scotia, Bethany, and Jamie. I've heard from your group, but I still haven't heard from the Tiffany Bell group, the Ashika Boone group, and the John Brimmer group, and the Elrika Brown group. So I need to hear from you guys. And the next,
what's name sent it to you?
I did.
Yeah, she sent it to you. The first one, when you talked about it.
Ashika.
Yeah, from you too. Sinatra C sent it.
Okay, what are you guys doing?
HIV/AIDS.
Okay, got it. Okay, so you're off the list. Thank you. So I still need a Tiffany Bell group topic, a John Brimmer group topic, and an Elrika Brown topic. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sounds good. In the next day or so, a couple of days, just want to make sure we don't have any overlap. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to admit this last student from Dr. Lundy's class, and I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go through the modules. Nobody has any questions. Everybody got the exam review schedule, correct?
No.
Okay. Dr. Lundy should have shared the master schedule with you. Misty, did you get it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so does that mean Lacole should have it? Check your announcements.
I was going to
Okay.
say she sent it in the announcements.
Okay, thanks. So everybody should have it by now. They start, are we just doing Friday, Saturday, Sunday? I moved mine from Friday to Sunday because there were too many on Friday. And I thought I'd give you guys another opportunity on the weekend. So I bumped mine to Sunday. It's already on the calendar. So everybody has their study guides, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So hopefully, like I suggested last week, hopefully you took a few minutes to go through your study guide for weeks 3 and 4 and looked at the information that we talked about last week in lecture and kind of checked it off or highlighted it on your study guide to make sure you understand it and you understand how it's presented on your study guide. And then this is week 5, so this is the last week for exam 2. Okay, so exam 2 will be weeks 3, 4, and 5. So after today, I would do the same thing, go to the study guide, make sure all the information that we're covering in class is covered in the study guide, and then start preparing. So anybody have any questions about that? I would highly encourage everybody go to a live session. I think they're very helpful to go live, go to as many as you can. As the instructors are taping it, will be sent. That's another reason why I have to get my recording stuff figured out, because I need to be able to record it and send it off to the other instructors so they can share it with their class. Okay. Any questions about that?
No, ma'am.
Remember that when you're doing your NCLEX, just want to NCLEX, case studies, whatever you're doing, please remember to start these assignments from your module. Okay, because if you're not starting them in your module, they're not populating, and we cannot accept screenshots. Okay, does that make sense? So, and I'll show you what I mean here. I know you guys know what I mean, but all right, I'm going to I'm not going to end the meeting. I'm going to share my screen. Okay.
Hi, Kitty. Thank you for bringing her home.
Hey, and can we, let's get muted.
But you have to accept that help.
Okay, mute.
Now you finally finished doing the
Who do I need
homework.
to mute? Somebody tell me who I need to mute, please.
They're hungry.
Guys, Amy, is it mute? Ashley. Anybody else muted?
Should have a select all mute button.
I know,
or
I'm trying to
mute all
find it.
button.
I've seen, oh, there it is. Yep. I've seen it. Mute, mute, mute. Oh, that's my mute. Okay, I think everybody's muted. Okay.
So there's still one student that is not muted.
Who?
Amy Qualls, Qualls.
She's, hang on. Let's see. Trying to find my mute all button.
She's muted now.
All right. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so let's go into our modules for this class. I'm going to do the student views so you can see what I see. I see what you see. So we are in week 5, right? So what's due this week? Your discussion question 2. Okay, a set of NCLEX questions, and then our attestation. I forgot to do the attestation with my group yesterday. So somebody remind me at the end of class, we have to do our attestation together. I just got carried away yesterday and we went right up until the time. So discussion question 2, please remember to read the whole thing through. Read all the instructions. There's several parts to this. And please make sure you're covering all of what you're being asked to. Your initial response is due tonight, right? Everybody knows that. This is a Wednesday week assignment. We have 4 weeks that have a Wednesday due date. This is one of them. Everybody knows that? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so your initial responses are due tonight. And your peer reviews are due on Sunday. Now, as I've told you before, I'm okay grading ahead of time. If you submit your discussion questions and they have the peer responses, I'm happy to start grading those over the weekend. Otherwise, I'll wait till next week. So, and here's what your NCLEX assignment, here's where you start it. I know most of you know that, but I am getting screenshots and I can't accept them. Okay, it's a school policy. That's not my rule. It's a school rule. We went through that in the orientation packet. So you have to be starting your NCLEX assignments here. in your module. Okay. And so next week is exam week, right? And so at this time next week, we'll be doing the exam. I hope to open it up over the weekend so that you can download it. Because I need you to download it before class. And then next week, there is a discussion question as well, and the attestation and the exam. Okay. I haven't decided next week if I'm going to do a recording for week 6 content, or if I'm going to do week 6 and week 7 together like we've done in the past. So I haven't quite got there yet. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, let's get going. So what are we covering today? Who's had a chance to look at the topics we're covering today? Anybody know? What are we
Environmental
covering?
health.
Okay, what else?
Occupational nurse. Epidemiology.
Great. So I'm going to go from the PowerPoints again today, and then we're going to jump into we're going to do a couple things. We'll briefly go through the PowerPoint because, as we know, the PowerPoint's an outline, right? And then for the then we'll go through the book and cover the important points that support the concept. And then I have a case study. Did anybody take a look at the case studies for any of these chapters? They're really good this week. A lot of good rationales, really good rationales. Okay, so let's see. By the end of this chapter, here's what we should be able to do. I'll put you guys down here. We should be able to explain how the environment influences human health and disease, which disciplines work most closely with nurses in environmental health, how is legislative and regulatory policies, how does that affect environmental health, and what do we need as nurses to be competent environmental health nurses with our nursing process. When you guys think of environmental health, what do you think about? What comes to mind?
Dealing with the community and the problems of health.
Mm-hmm.
I think about pollution.
Same here. Asbestos.
Mm-hmm. What about contaminated water?
Contaminated soil.
Contaminated soil. What about landfills? Living near highways. Older homes.
Living in like polluted areas, like say like a really like polluted air and stuff like that.
Yep. Yep. Living in older homes.
Mm-hmm.
Going to older schools. I mean, there are so many environmental risks that we are exposed to on a daily basis. It's hard to even keep track. But I believe that most of us, including myself, we take so much of it for granted, right? That somebody else is looking after to make sure our water is healthy. Somebody else is, EPA is going to take care of making sure we have minimal pollution, those kinds of things, right? And so we know that a healthy environment is essential for optimal health and healthcare, right? We often take the environment for granted, and we may fail to see the hazards right in front of us. What kind of hazards are we talking about? Chemical, biological, radiological, air, water, food we eat, food preparation, right? Lots to think about. Okay. Climate change. Do we need to talk about climate change, or are we all pretty educated on what needs to happen, right? Who are our most vulnerable populations when it comes to climate change? Children, elderly, the sick, the already predisposed with chronic conditions, right? What is our role? Mitigation and response. Okay, so when we talk about doing environmental health assessments, what does that look like? I'm just going through the PowerPoint, and then we're going to go into the book. Okay, when we're doing an environmental assessment, we're going to be looking at air, water, land, and food. Okay, chemical, biological, radiological. And we'll look at the I Prepare Mnemonic for doing an assessment. Windshield surveys, databases, assessments. These are all tools that we can use to do our environmental assessment. Right to know laws, risk assessment, assessing risks of children. This is all part of the, that was all part of the assessment. And so what are the health risks? Okay, or how do we reduce them? Right? Let's do our ADPI. Okay, so let's transpose our ADPI into the community, and now we are looking through the lens of environmental health. Okay, so we're applying the basic principles of disease prevention. What is that? Primary, secondary, tertiary. Communication, ethics, and then the agencies that oversee environmental issues. And then advocacy. Nurses, we do have the responsibility to be informed, right? And then we have to be advocates for our citizens regarding environmental health issues. If there are issues in the environment, we have to be able to communicate those on a timely basis. Right? And then we also look at environmental justice and environmental health disparities. And here's some of the laws, acts that were passed on slide 11. So what are some unique environmental health threats in the healthcare industry? Mercury. Why is mercury a risk?
It's deadly ingested.
Yep. Where does mercury come from? What might we see in the environment when we're doing our environmental assessment? What is tied with mercury? With nutrition, fish, too much fish. What if clients are having, they're getting their fish from streams and lakes in the community that's polluted? Lot to think about. All right. And then as nurses, we need to know about what our referral sources are for environmental health in the community. Okay. Last slide. What are the roles for nurses in environmental health? What does this look like? Does this look like your ADPI? Okay. Your assessment, referral, community involvement, risk communication, epidemiologic investigations, and policy development. So this week we tie environmental health with epidemiology, and then our role as an occupational nurse, because that is the work environment. So that's why those three chapters are tied together this week. Okay, so let's go to our book for chapter 6. Okay, we're starting on page 84. After reviewing the chapters again this week, I would like to focus on the boxes in these chapters that are summaries of what's going on. And then when we get through this chapter, we'll do the case study, chapter 6 case study. Okay, so this chapter outline tells you how the chapter is going to look. Okay, what is the environmental health sciences, toxicology, epidemiology, and the multidisciplinary approaches. Climate change. Then we talked about when we're doing our environmental health assessment, air, water, land, and food. The right to know, risk assessment, and then how do we assess environmental risks of children? And then the last part of this chapter talks about reducing environmental health risks, communication, ethics, government oversight. And then how can we be an advocate? Okay, so that's, and again, here's your objectives, the same that are in the PowerPoint. Okay, if any of these terms you need to look up, you can just click on the term and it takes you to the section of the chapter for a definition. Okay. Okay. Okay, so box 6.1, general health competencies for nurses. Okay, as nurses, we do need to understand the principles between individuals, populations, and the environment. And that includes the work environment too, right? We need to understand pathways for exposure to environmental hazards, prevention, control, right? Interventions, and what role we can play in research. Okay, we need to be able to do an accurate environmental assessment and referral, right? We should be able to successfully complete a health history and recognize potential hazards, right? Make referrals when necessary and have a resource list, referral sources, resource list that you can provide depending on what the risk is. Right? And as nurses, we need to demonstrate the role of advocacy in the community, being able to communicate effectively with respect to potential risks in the environment. And then we should be educated on policy framework, major pieces of legislation. So for example, for me as a school nurse, I'm very familiar with what legislation and regulations affect or dictate our practice of school nurses. Well, it's the same with environmental nurses, public health nurses. Okay, Healthy People 2020. Okay, important. They have objectives related to environmental health, and there's 6 of them. Okay, eliminate elevated blood levels in children. Is lead poisoning a health risk for kids?
Yep.
An environmental health risk? Of course it is.
Yep.
Right? Minimize the risk to the population and the environment by hazardous sites. That's, do you live in an area of the community that is next to a landfill or next to a power plant? Reduce pesticide exposure, right? That's for your migrant, your rural communities, right? Reduce the amount of toxic pollutants released into the environment. Reduce indoor allergen levels. We work with this all the time in schools, especially the old schools. Decrease the number of US homes that are found to have lead-based paint or related hazards. Okay. We're going to do epidemiology in the next chapter. Okay. If you want to read about climate change, it starts on page 89. Fascinating information. Okay. This is also a very good evidence-based practice study to read through. Okay, it is on page 89. It talks about hurricanes and the enormous challenges public health nurses have after a hurricane. I mean, what do we think of? We think of all the environmental risks that build up after a natural disaster like a hurricane. Right? Read through this. This is a good one. Okay. Okay, and then we talk about how to do a good environmental assessment. This starts on page 90. Okay. What does this look like? What does this box, how-to box look like? Does that look like your AdPie? So this is an excellent representation on page 91 of how to apply your nursing process to environmental health, or to occupational health, or to school nursing, or to hospice nursing, or to faith-based nursing. This is what we need to do throughout this class. We are expected to be able to describe the nursing process with whatever concept or topic we're talking about. So for environmental health, what does our assessment look like? Inventories, history questions that cover environmental issues. Diagnosis, right? Do we relate the disease and environmental factors in the diagnosis? And then we set goals based on what our assessment is, right? If we find risks, how are we going to mitigate and eliminate those risks? Right? And then we start to plan in the community. What do we need to do? What education needs to happen? What issues are already a problem in the tertiary level, and we need to help mitigate them? Right? And then our interventions and our evaluation. Make sense? This is a mnemonic. Box 6.2 is a good box to review. It's the I Prepare Mnemonic. Okay, and it helps you do an assessment of an exposure history. Right? It helps to identify current and past exposures. Right? With the long-term goal of reducing adverse health effects. Right? So it focuses on different categories of questions that you need to ask. For example, investigate potential exposures. What does the present work look like? Are you exposed to solvents, dust, fumes, radiation? What does your residence look like? When was it built? What type of heating do you have? Have you recently remodeled your home? And then assessing environmental concerns. Are there environmental concerns in your neighborhood? Air, water, soil. What have you done in the past? What was your past work? What activities do you like to do? Anyway, this is a really good mnemonic for how to conduct an exposure assessment. And then a windshield survey is always helpful. What is a windshield survey? Can somebody help me out? How would you
Isn't that what you observe in your area?
Mm-hmm. So what kinds of things might you be looking for in your windshield survey with regards to environmental health?
Like air pollution, like maybe vehicles emitting excessive amounts of exhaust or something like that.
What about driving around and seeing lots of trash built up?
Yeah.
What about playgrounds that are broken? The equipment's broken. Lots of environmental risks you could pick up on your environmental survey. Right? And then it goes through the 4 main categories. The air, you can read through these. They start on page 91. Air pollution or air. Okay. And it goes through water, land, food. Okay. And food, we think of what? We think of food poisoning, right? An outbreak at a restaurant, right? That's an environmental risk. Food production, food preparation, foodborne illnesses, pesticides. Yeah, absolutely. Pesticides are what do we know about pesticides? Pesticides, the farming community, migrant community, the biggest environmental risk to them is pesticide exposure. We know that. Do we not? And then we talk about the right to know, right? The public has the right to know about hazardous chemicals in the environment, right? I find this is interesting. It's called EnviroFacts. And I did this a couple of terms ago. Where is it? EnviroFacts. It's on the EPA website. You can put in your zip code and it will give you major sources of environmental risks in your zip code. Pollution, air, water issues, right? And then you can also look at a consumer confidence report. And then risk assessment, right? Currently, now EPA, everybody knows what that is, right? Environmental Protection Agency. They are the branch that oversees environmental health, environmental risks, environmental issues, right? They do risk assessments and help develop standards, health standards, right? So what is a risk assessment, right? A risk assessment refers to the process to determine the probability that a health threat there's a health threat associated with exposure. Okay. We talked about one of the very vulnerable populations for environmental risks are pregnant moms, right? Why is that? What if they're exposed to something chemical during fetal development? And it's a toxic exposure. Okay, we have to take that into consideration. That's why when we do prenatal care, prenatal visits, we do these kind of assessments. Table 6.1 is interesting, right? It's agents, environmental agents, and then what are potential adverse reproductive outcomes? I pull out lead here as a common or something that's familiar to me. Okay. Interesting. Food Quality Protection Act of 1996. It's interesting to read through that. Have a look at box 6.4, right? And then we know children are especially at risk for environmental hazards, right? For what reasons? Poverty, lack of access to healthcare, dangerous environmental situations where they may live, right? Children are also at risk because the size and the immaturity of their systems, immune systems, their respiratory systems, right? How do we reduce environmental risks? Okay. What do you think? How do we reduce them? What do you guys think? So if you haven't looked at these PowerPoints or looked at the readings, you may not be able to answer the questions I'm asking you. And this is all new information to you. But even if you haven't read it, what would you think would be some steps to reduce environmental risks?
I think if they're modifiable risks, to educate your population.
Right? Doing a health assessment or environmental assessment, early identification, right? Risk assessment also includes the way communities dispose of materials. Is the waste incinerated? Is it in the water? Does it go into a landfill? Anybody ever see the movie Aaron Brockovich?
Yes.
What's that movie about?
Contaminated water from the power plant.
That movie is a textbook of this chapter of what can happen if an environmental risk is not handled appropriately. Okay, so let's look at our levels of prevention with regards to the environment. And here they pick lead exposure, since that is a common environmental risk. Okay, so what would our primary prevention be? To educate the use of only lead-based paint. And secondary, what is secondary? Screening, right? Early identification. If lead is found in the paint, remove the paint and replace it with non-lead paint, right? So early identification, early intervention. And then tertiary, if somebody has been exposed or has a high level of exposure, at their first signs of exposure, we're going to have to take, we're going to have to help them get their blood levels of lead down. Okay, makes sense?
Yep.
Right, nursing interventions to reduce environmental health risks take on many forms. But again, our role as a community nurse in general, what is one of our most important roles as a community nurse? Education, right? Education is a key nursing action, right? We work with community members, we develop our key players, key stakeholders in the community, and we ask for their assistance in working to reduce harmful environmental exposures. Right? Carbon monoxide. What kinds of things could we do? What do we do in our homes? Fire detectors or fire detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. Okay. And then communication, right? Risk is a familiar term. We're always talking about risk in nursing, right? We talk to moms about the risks of pregnancy, communicable diseases, injuries, intentional, unintentional injuries, personal choices, smoking, alcohol, drug consumption, right? So risk assessment with regards to environmental health is focused on characterizing what the hazard is. What is the source? Is it physical? Is it chemical? How toxic is it? Right? What are the modes of transmission, the route of exposure? So those are all the things we look at when we talk about environmental hazards. Okay. And then communication, right? We need to be providing the correct information to the right people at the right time. Okay. And then we always have ethics issues, ethics that we need to be familiar with. Ethical issues with regards to environmental health. What would those be? Right? We must communicate. That's communication is one of the ethical, not principles, but what is ethically right that the nurse needs to do when you become aware of environmental risks, environmental exposures. Right? Asking companies to reduce their air pollution, water pollution. Okay. And then we know about government environmental protection. That's your EPA. And this is really interesting, box 6.6. It talks about environmental laws. You can read through that. Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, OSHA. OSHA is big. We'll talk about that in chapter 32 as well. But what is OSHA? OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health. Okay. They are there. Their job is to ensure workers are safe in the workplace. It includes environmental risks, right? OSHA monitors that employees work free of hazards in their workspace. They're healthy, so they're not exposed to chemicals, or if they are, they have protection. Excessive noise, mechanical dangers, heat or cold extremes, unsanitary conditions. OSHA establishes these kinds of standards in the workplace and enforces that workers are safe in their workspace. Okay. And then advocacy, right? We all know why we as nurses are advocates in our community, right? Here it says more than 3 million nurses in the United States there are more than 3 million nurses in the United States, and we should be a strong voice for change, right? As informed citizens, we can work to protect the environment and the health of our clients, families, and communities, right? We're always a trusted source of information, right? Okay, that's it for this chapter. We went through the roles, that's in your PowerPoint. These are all the different roles that we could potentially be, all the hats we could be wearing for an environmental health nurse. We could be wearing one or all. If you're working in the rural community, you're probably all of these. You're probably participating in all of these. Okay. So questions on environmental health. It's really, it's a big deal everywhere, your hospital settings, your clinic settings, but think about out in the community, right? Think about out in the community, how many risks there are, environmental risks. All right, let's do this case study. I need you to read what's in the yellow, please. Or do you want me to read it to you? Small rural community is located about 150 miles from the nearest tertiary care center. The community comprises less than 500 residents who are primarily Mexican immigrants. Many of them in the community are employed at the local power plant, which is located at the edge of town. The women work in the grape fields for a few hours a day while managing the household chores in the afternoons. So residents in the community have verbalized concerns over chemicals used in the grape fields in the power plant. They've also wondered if there are any environmental concerns related to the massive power lines above the town. Residents believe that women have been experiencing a high number of miscarriages and that these factors must be related. So let's look at the first question. I don't really care that we see the answer. What I'm more interested in is reading the rationale, and rationales are very, very important to read through whenever you have the opportunity, whether it's with your Kaplan, your NCLEX, whenever you can read through rationales, those are teachable. That's teachable information. Okay, so what's our first question? Public health nurse has a responsibility to be informed about environmental health risks. I am going to not let you see the rationale first, though. Public health nurse has the responsibility to be informed about environmental health risks in the community. In what way is this competency demonstrated? So why is A the right answer and B, C, and D are not, based on what we just talked about? What do you guys think? Well, we just talked about for half an hour that the nurse provides education and advocates to support a healthier environment, right? So we understand why that's the correct answer, right?
Yes, because we're supposed to be advocates for our patients.
Yes.
And
And go ahead.
the others are not really teaching.
Exactly. Right? You can't assume D is correct. You don't know, right? You can't assume C is correct. You have no idea. Right? And B is just simply overwhelming. Okay. So based on what we just talked about, education and advocacy. Okay, so let's read through this. As nurses, we are some of the most trusted sources of health information to the public. It is our responsibility to know environmental health risks. This includes knowing how to assess them, how to eliminate or reduce them, communicate, educate, advocate, because we want to support a healthier environment. There's 10 principles that compromise the nurse's responsibility to environmental health. Okay. These principles say, this is the crux of the whole chapter, our 10 principles. We just went through them in one way or another. It is essential that nurses know about environmental health. Nurses should not use products or practices that harm the environment. Nurses should have the right to work in a safe and healthy place. And nurses and other healthcare professionals have the right to know in a timely manner about any possible harmful products, chemicals, pollutants, and hazards to which they may be exposed. Multidisciplinary collaboration is a factor that sustains a healthy environment. We've talked about all of these in the last half hour. The choice of materials, products, technology, and practices in the environment that affects nurses is based on best practices. And the nurses should respect the diversity of the people for whom they serve. And also focus on the quality of the environment, which is where their clients work and live. Right? And then nurses, other healthcare professionals, families, patients, communities have the right to know timely information about potentially harmful products. And lastly, the nurses should participate both in research and advocacy related to promoting a healthy environment. Does all that make sense? Pulls it all together. That rationale pulls this whole chapter together. Okay, let's go to number 2. Which of the following sciences would be used to study poisonous effects of chemicals in the community? We know it's toxicology. Well, we didn't talk about it specifically, but toxicology. So let's read the rationale about what these are. Toxicology is the basic science that studies the health effects associated with chemical exposures. Right? Pharmacology, which studies that human health effects, both desirable and undesirable, with regards to drugs. Okay. So there's your definition of toxicology. Okay, so let's read number 3, last one. What are the ways in which community health nurses can assess the environmental risks of a population? We just went through this. What are they? We're assessing environmental health risks of a population.
Demographics.
Yep. No, not demographics. Medium, setting, and functional location. Let's read through these. Okay, so what are the ways in which a community nurse could assess environmental health risks of a population? So there are a number of ways to assess environmental health risks, right? You might assess it, when they say medium, they're referring to air, water, soil, food. Okay, so we've talked about that being one of the areas that we assess, right? Setting, C is the setting. Are we urban, rural, suburban? Right, so the medium is the air, water, soil, food. Setting is rural or urban, migrant, city. Okay. We can also functional location means where are we? Are we at home? Are we at school? Are we in the workplace? Are we at the rec center? Are we at the bank? Are we at church? Right? So does everybody understand that? So each of these locations provide a unique environmental exposure. And some of them, a lot of them have overlapping exposures. And then the demographics and the socioeconomic status would not be typical factors in assessing environmental health, but the medium, the setting, and the functional, which are all fancy words for air, water, food, and soil. The setting, is it rural or is it urban? And then the functional location, is it your home, your school, your workplace? Okay. Can we move on to epidemiology? If you're not into epidemiology and stuff like this, this chapter gets to be a lot of information. I'll try and go through this pretty quickly. Okay, so some of the objectives in this chapter. Define epidemiology, how it's developed over time. What do you guys think epidemiology is? What's epidemiology?
Professor Marvel,
Yes.
are you going to?
Yes. Jane,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm going to stop recording, right?
Yes, that's what I was going to ask.
Thank you so much. Okay, where's my recording thing? Oh, up here. Okay, so I'm going to